Hello, thank you for checking out PT Bubbles. This is the second in a series of videos where I'm taking you through servicing the front brakes all the way to removing the K-frame and replacing the rack and pinion. In this video, we're going to focus on servicing the struts, the lower control arms, the sway bar, and the sway bar linkages, and the passenger side CV axle, because that's easier to take off. I'm splitting up the CV axles into two different videos because we'll do the passenger side in this video where we're just removing the more accessible things on either side, like the lower control arm and the things I mentioned. The passenger side CV axle is much easier to remove, to pop out, than the driver's side. Because of the way that I do the driver's side CV axle, I put it in the next video that you can go to, where we remove the K-frame and the rack and pinion. And I do that because once those are removed, the driver's side is much easier to access, and I remove it in an unorthodox or unusual way. I use a grinder, and we'll get to those details. But if you do need to remove the driver's side and you want to skip to that video, you can do that. But the way that I get to the driver's side CV axle is by first removing the K-frame and the rack and pinion. I don't have a recording, I don't have it on video, of removing the passenger side CV axle from a turbo model PT like this one you see here, if you can see where my hand is. But the removal is still doable on the turbo models for the passenger side like it is on the naturally aspirated. It's accessible and easy to pop out, and I don't drop the K-frame to do that. But you will see the naturally aspirated passenger side CV axle removal, just not the turbo removal, but it's essentially the same. So I wanted to mention something about hammering on bolts. Particularly in this video, you'll see me hammer on the tie rod end bolt, especially when I'm removing the old one. And then also, can you see? Yeah, here you go, right here, the strut bolts. And I wanted to mention this because I don't follow my own best advice, and I wanted to make sure that you take precaution when you do this. So if you have to hammer a bolt out, like one of these, the tie rod or the strut bolts, best practice is to, well, let's talk about the tie rod, because it's got this sort of crown nut on the other side of the bolt that you tighten. Once you loosen that and it's off, flip it over so the crown part is facing up and the flat part of the nut is on the bottom, and thread it on to where it's just past the bottom of the bolt, and then hammer on that. That way you're not mashing up the threads on the bolt, which can make it a real pain in the ass, if not impossible, once it's time to thread the nut back on for reassembly. You might have done yourself a big disfavor by mashing up the threads on the bottom there, and I've done this, and boy, it sucks. So best practice is to put a nut back on before you start hammering a bolt. Same with up here on the strut bolts. I don't do it. Again, I don't follow my own advice, but best thing would have been to thread a nut back on enough so I could hammer on the nut face rather than the actual bolt. And you can put that nut, once again, flush with the bolt, or even just a little bit threaded off, so when the hammer hits, it's hitting the nut and not the end of the bolt. With the steering knuckle now removed, this is an opportune time for you to replace the wheel bearing if it is bad. And I would recommend you go to the video that I have in this series of episodes that is for that purpose of replacing the wheel bearing. You'll get to see the steering knuckle removed again on the car, but since you've already done that in this video, you can go right to the wheel bearing, pressing it out and pressing it back in section of the wheel bearing, and it's the hub actually, the wheel bearing and the wheel hub, which has the bolts, the spokes for the lug nuts, not spokes, but you know, the bolts the lug nuts go on that hold the wheel on. Yeah, so I'd recommend that if you are worried about wheel bearing noise, vibration, you're experiencing anything that makes that you've diagnosed that the wheel bearing has gone bad. You're at the point where you've already removed the steering knuckle. So if you got the tools and the time and the desire, go for it. good job making it this far, and with the disassembly of all the components in this video. The strut, the sway bar, and the linkages, the lower control arm, the passenger side CV axle, and the steering knuckle. You can either continue watching this video for reassembly and then watch the previous video for the last components of the brake caliper and the rotor, or you can skip to the next video in this series where we will remove the K-frame and the rack and pinion and the driver's side CV axle. And I wanted to mention the strut bolt direction because I was confused by what was in the service manual, and if I ever said it wrong on another video or in any of the text, I wanted to clarify that with this. The correct bolt direction for your struts is as such, okay? The bolt needs to go in from the front of the vehicle towards the rear. And this is confusing because in the service manual it almost sounds like it's saying they should go the other way. But if you do it the other way, which I tried, thinking I was doing what was right, you will find that this bolt on the brake caliper bracket will not go in because it runs into the threads of the bolt and the nut coming out on the front side if you do it backwards. So I did that and then had to disassemble it all and flip it around the right way. Unfortunately, I did not capture on video installation of the lower control arm and reinstalling and inserting onto the lower control arm ball joint the steering knuckle. It's essentially the reversal of removal, with the exception that you have to torque things down to the right torque. So let me show you that. On the lower control arm, which you can see here, it has this sway bar. Here is the steering knuckle pinch nut and bolt right there. You'll want to torque that nut and bolt to 70 foot-pounds. That secures the steering knuckle to the lower control arm. Then for the lower control arm where it bolts into the K-frame, the rear bolt is torqued to 185 foot-pounds. The front bolt of the lower control arm, which this is the passenger side, and the motor mount, the lower torque strut, goes into the K-frame, and behind this is the other bolt that secures the front side of the lower control arm. Okay, it's right in here. That is torqued to 125 foot-pounds. Okay, so once again, the pinch bolt that secures the steering knuckle to the lower control arm, 70. Front bolt of the lower control arm into the K-frame is 125 foot-pounds, and the rear 185 foot-pounds. All right, it's time for the sway bar, and I wanted to point out the direction of the bolts on your sway bar, because if you get the aftermarket sway bar links, I found that the bolt, if you install it from the bottom up, so the threads come out up on top, you're at risk of cutting into this boot on the CV axle. So you can see I installed my sway bar links with the bolt facing down and the threads coming out of the bottom. So I would do that for safety. It may be because the aftermarket bolts are longer than the factory, and that's why it was at risk of poking in and cutting open the boot.